TimeAgeddon by Edmund Wells.
Chapter 1. The future is a figment of our imagination, while the past is merely stories we tell ourselves. Even our perception of the present moment is encapsulated by predictions and hypotheses of that which is purely subjective. It might therefore be suggested that since we have no control over the past or the future, we also have no real control or free will whatsoever. Thus it is impossible to entirely grasp reality, and nearly as improbable that I will be able to provide a satisfactory explanation as to why I have just shit myself. But this story is neither about the subjectivity of reality, nor the feces within my drawers. It is about the attack on time itself, perpetrated by a decidedly nasty terrorist organization of non-earthly beings with human-level cognitive functionality, or aliens as they were once called before that term was deemed rude. The actions of these non-earthly beings with human-level cognitive functionality had incredible and unpredictable implications on all earthling kind. Our story arbitrarily begins in the year 2323 aboard a somewhat dated spaceship which was a Spacebus Model 857, owned by the Faster Flights transport company, which was notorious for ejecting passengers to meet weight requirements. This transgalactic flight was returning to Earth to import the exports from planet Trumponia, a planet which had been purchased and run by the Trump estate and was most notable for having upside-down gravity and really bad hair. Piloting this spaceliner was someone that you ought to like if this story is to be successful, a chap named Pete, and this was about to become the second most memorable flight of his intergalactic life, even though he did not know the specific contents he was importing due to his overwhelming disinterest. Co-pilots were of course androids in those days, and his was a seldom reliable one named Tuggy, which was an acronym for something probably. Tuggy was uncharacteristically sober, which perhaps explained how he was able to simultaneously switch the satellite's comm to Earth's space control frequency while scratching his balls as they approached their home planet's atmosphere. Pete handsomely turned to the robot.
It's been a good space flight, Tuggy. I emphatically concur.
Tuggy's response seemed as unnecessary as it was unconvincing, but Pete knew not to engage the robo-twat, so he turned the conversation to the business at present.
We're still a bit heavy for our landing.
Well, fuck you too. You know I'm on a strict space diet.
No, I mean, we'll have to dump some chemtrails.
Tuggy didn't seem satisfied by Pete's verbal course correction, so he glumly looked out the side window with a huff. Pete didn't like tension in his cockpit, which I admit sounds dirty, but regardless, he tried to lighten up the intergalactic mood.
So what are you gonna do when we get home?
You mean before or after I space plow your mom?
Okay, serious faces now while I check in.
Bloop. Earth Space Control, this is Faster Flights 9211, entering your mesospheric space. Cruising at 28,000, requesting final descent. The voice that came over the communication uplink was that of a sweet and presumably attractive human female, which I will now do a bad job of performing.
Welcome home, Faster Flights 90211. You are satellite identified on a code of 90210. Begin descent and advise when you have reached the tropospheric level.
Pete was always pleasantly surprised when a female human was the space controller. Ever since the Great War of the Flapping Privates, there weren't many of them left.
Bloop.
Donald,
replied he, which may sound like an odd transmission for those of you unfamiliar with the revision of the space traffic phraseology in 2099, when the word Roger was deemed offensive and replaced with Donald. Just as Pete was about to push the futuristic-looking buttons that would initiate the descent sequence, he heard a click that sounded like this. Pete turned and saw that Tuggy had an illegally modified space gun pointed at him.
What are you doing, Tugless?
What does it look like? I'm hijacking this space shipment.
This type of thing was not all that uncommon. To explain, I will have to bring you up to light speed on the happenings of the galaxy between your time and mine. Actually, I think I shall sing it. You see, the galaxy finally came to its senses and banned all religions. About 200 light years before our story began. It was a glorious accomplishment, but was monumentally complicated. First, there had to be a general consensus that freedom of belief was not something that served us well. Then we had the challenging task of defining what exactly constituted a religion, so that we could ban it. This became astronomically complicated. due to the existence of non-theistic religions, it didn't work to define them as worshippers of a deity, so the focus shifted to trying to define them based on their doctrinal beliefs. But they were so vastly diverse that the proposal was to define them as groups of like-minded beings with common beliefs on morality. But that didn't work either, because that would put political parties into the realm of religion, and the idea that people's political beliefs can become counterproductive is obviously preposterous. The next attempt was to define religion as any group that claims moral superiority. This didn't last long because of the vegans. Defining them as charitable organizations didn't help their cause either. Eventually they settled on the following, which I will quote directly from the Galactic Charter of Prohibition. A religion shall be defined as any organized group that believes in anything that cannot be materialistically proven beyond what the council deems to be reasonable doubt. Now, this definition did pose a problem for the transgender community, or transcom, who was still demanding legal intervention that would punish anyone who did not address them as a gender of their own choosing, despite having no scientific evidence to support their claim, of course. As is always their way, the Transcom discussed the matter in a rational and drama-free way over the next decade. This took so long partly because it required extra time to express themselves without offending anyone amid the ever-changing accepted language, and also because the list of accepted gender identities was growing so fast that even they couldn't keep up with it. In the end, the Transcom decided to forego the annoyance of potentially being misgendered if it meant they could get rid of those hateful, exclusionary, and accusatory religions. It was wonderful for the people of the galaxy to be able to stop fighting over their various beliefs and values, and get back to fighting over the more important things like land ownership, race, culture, and their social-economic differences. But while the eradication of religion was a lovely achievement, it was not without its complications. For example, there were multitudes of people who were left with the challenge of trying to maintain their victim status now that they didn't have religion to blame for their perceived oppression. Ironically, it was the scientific community that got the worst of it. Since there was still no way to use material methods to prove the existence of consciousness, they had to accept that we don't actually think at all. Hence the expression, I don't think, therefore I am. The expectations were extremely high for the scientific community now, but they ran into an unforeseen problem of their own creation. Because people were no longer permitted to believe in anything that could not be empirically proven, it was, by extension, forbidden to pose a hypothesis as to anything not yet known, lest you be accused of having blind faith, which was, of course, a crime punishable by death. So progress came to a crutch-grinding halt. In fact, most of the scientists spent more time trying to prove that they didn't believe in unproven theories than actually trying to discover anything of value. A prime example of this was the discovery of the wave particle, which was previously thought to be a scientific impossibility, and then turned out to be the most astonishing renewable energy source in the universe. But before its discovery was allowed to be accepted, the scientific community first had to fight for nearly a century to determine whether or not it was in their best interest to discover it. Their main fear was that it was such an incredible and unexplainable phenomenon that it must either have been brought into existence from a different dimension, or worse still, it might provoke some people into thinking that perhaps there is a god. The very thought of such closed-mindedness simply could not be permitted. Men continued to strive for social progress, and most of our efforts were focused on removing verbal weapons from the planet. Since language was deemed potentially violent, it was accepted that physical violence was a permissible response to mean words. It was a time that was as deadly as it was polite. Of course, women found themselves at a disadvantage because they had to choose between being silent or being beaten up. This led to the aforementioned uprising and subsequent war of the sexes. General Olga stood in front of the Butchie troops and gave a boob-felt speech that was so inspirational that some of them thought they had been sexually molested. It went like this.
My fellow fella-haters, we are gathered here today because those bastards think they can make us submissive. They think they can tell us what to do with our bodies. They think they can hold doors for us and protect us from predators. Well, I say no more. We have put up with their brutish and rugged ways for too long, and this time it's personable.
The cheer was monumental and shrill as they charged their enemy like enraged college students, sounding kind of like this. Yay! The fields of battle were covered in the menstrual blood of millions of women, and their gender was nearly wiped out of existence. partly because the only men to join the cause were spineless wimps trying to look virtuous. So all of this progress created a lot of resentment and hatred that resulted in the unprecedented violence and crime of the sort that was currently happening aboard Faster Flight's 9211. But Pete the pilot was not particularly concerned with the history of his civilization in the moment. He was more preoccupied with the laser gun that Tuggy had pointed at his face. Luckily, Tuggy only had one good eye, hence the eye patch that I failed to mention earlier. So the robot's peripheral vision was slightly limited, allowing Pete to secretly enter the hijacking code into his space transponder. Within a couple micropars, the female controller's voice came over their headsets.
Space Control to Faster Flight 90211. Hey lads, did you mean to send the hijacking distress code or should I disregard?
Pete sheepishly turned to Tuggy before responding. Bloop.
Negative Control Center, this is the real deal. But since I'll be getting shot soon, I'll take the opportunity now to wish you a lovely morning. That's too bad. Your voice made you sound like you're slightly above average looking. I would have liked to get to know you better. As long as you're not a smelling non-earthly being with human-level cognitive functionality, or a Puerto Rican.
She'd guessed right, which was incredible for a number of reasons that will ultimately become apparent. For one thing, he was not entirely repulsive despite being a ginger, and he was also a cis-human. Not unexpectedly, her response grabbed Tuggy's attention, so he grabbed the comm transmitter dongle. Bloop.
How do you feel about Android?
Dude.
Fuck off, she sounds easy.
What she said next was pretty ingenious for a girl.
To be honest, I've had a few bad experiences with mechanical lovers, so now I only date them if they can prove they won't hurt me.
Tuggy leaned into Pete and was suddenly chummy.
Who said anything about dating? I just want to plug in and then give her a fake number in case she's space knocked up.
Bloop.
How can I prove I'm not dangerous, honey?
Well, I really like a Mott who is equipped with an onboard restraining kit.
Bloop.
Of course I have that add-on. It was only $5.
Then prove to me you aren't a threat by strapping yourself up in it.
Pete was nervous, not sure if Tuggy would take the bait. Bloop.
I'll do you one better. I'll strap Pete here up. I'll even spank him a little if you'd like.
You know what? I would like that.
Now just hold on.
Shut up, sex slave.
Don't you dare gay me! Little did Tuggy know, the latest generation of onboard bondage kits came with a built-in remote access power bypass, in case an android went rogue and started going all Bill Cosby. It was called the safe word override. At the very last light second, the controller transmitted the emergency shutdown frequency over the satellite comm, completely incapacitating Tuggy, causing him to shit himself even worse than I did.